Hey, welcome to the Forward Motion Business Show. I'm Professor Ken,
And I'm Professor Paul Marino.
and here we are at United International College. And this show is a little different than what we normally do because normally we have a guest, and we couldn't get the guest couldn't come as planned. But we thought we talk about something that's pretty important, and that is now that it seems that we're coming out of COVID, what can we do, and what do businesses have to do? And I think it's a relevant topic because those businesses that got through all this, now what do they do? How do they get through this, and what's the next step? And we could talk about a few things. The marketing part, the HR part, I think is important, right? How they get employees to do all that. So it's all important things, and I think that's going to be key moving forward.
Well, I think the first thing that employers need to do is I don't think we can go back to the way it was prior to COVID. I think employers today are going to have to embrace the new reality. And the new reality is going to be there's going to be flex time. There's going to be people who work remotely. There's going to be even today, many people want to have a Zoom meeting.
Right.
At least the initial meeting is going to be a Zoom meeting prior to a face-to-face meeting. So I think it's important for employers to embrace these new protocols that were brought about by the pandemic and not say, oh, we're going to go back to the old way and we're going to do this and we're going to do that.
Yeah, that's the key. How do we get we heard a lot of expressions. I think the new normal, whatever that meant, and we heard the term pivot a lot.
Right, exactly.
I don't know what pivot means. I'm a baseball fan, baseball guy. Pivot is a different meaning to me. You pivot on the ball. That's a little different. And I think we overuse that word. Basically, it's just trying to adapt your strategy in the crisis, right? We all had a crisis to go through. So how do we adapt in the crisis, right?
Well, again, I think there's going to be a lot of different areas where a new protocol is going to support itself. One, I don't think employers are going to need the amount of office space that they prior need. I think they're going to realize that there's a certain class of employee, there's a certain job function that doesn't need to be in the office every day. Doesn't have to need to be 9 to 5. I think one of the most important things that they're going to have to come up with, if they embrace flex time and if they embrace Zoom and they embrace this new reality or pivot, as you like to call it, I think that one of the important things is they're going to have to come up with a metric how they can monitor and evaluate employees. What is the new metric? The old metric in my grandfather's day or in my parents' day was, you showed up 9 to 5.
Right.
But the new metric is how do I evaluate someone who's working remotely? How do I,
Right.
it's going to be much more a goal setting environment.
Yeah, and so I've been remote, and we use the word remote. It's just working from home, really, right? I've been remote all my professional life, most of my professional life. Very few times that I have an office to report to, and so I'm used to it. I think I can operate as long as I have an internet connection now. I could just about do my work anywhere, right? So it's interesting because now we've adapted to this remote work atmosphere. I don't think it's going to stay that way, not for all positions, because there is that team building that you
Yeah.
don't get.
The human interaction.
Right. You don't get that social human
Right.
interaction. I mean, what happens? The conversation around the water cooler never happens anymore.
Are there still water coolers? I don't think
I don't know.
I don't think there's water
I
coolers
don't know if there
anymore.
are, but
There might be juice bars, but I don't think there's
Yeah.
water coolers.
there, or the coffee machine, or the espresso, or the latte machine, or
Right,
something like
right.
that. But how do you do that? Because if I had 10 employees, I can see a couple of them working from home, maybe, but then they never meet as a team. What happens to team building? What happens to knowing who could move up and take a managerial position? Can you really determine who's going to take a managerial position from a remote working environment?
Well, I think we're going to go to a blended format, if I may steal that concept from the universities. But some of the clients that I deal with will say to me, we have our people coming in Tuesday and Thursday, and
Right.
then the rest of the week they're working remotely. And
Right.
one of the models I think we're going to see, and it's probably going to come out of California. Most of the high tech companies have flex time. Most of the high tech companies that are dealing with programmers in different locations, they've embraced this years ago prior
Yeah,
to COVID.
right.
So I think some of those models that are coming out of California for the high tech and the blended scenario, if you're in the office maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week for that team building exercise and that social interaction and all of that, but it's going to be a blended model. We are not going back to everybody checks in 9 to 5.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. Um, how many of us would like that free time? And if you look at what's happening in terms of the great job resignation or whatever they're calling it, people are looking for opportunities to get that balance of life. I remember, if you think about the with the baby boomers, right? That was a big thing, the balance of life. How do you balance your life?
Right.
And I have quality time, or time with my kid, or they find an hour to talk around the family table or stuff like that. And now I think it's better for us, because now we should have a goal of living our lives more than just experience our lives at work, right?
Well, I think what you're going to see is, and I hope that's something that we can incorporate in our show in the future. I think you're going to see potential employees taking a different look at a company. They're not looking at that company as this is a job. I'm
Right.
going to go in there as a job.
Right.
They're looking at that company and saying, what exactly does that company do? What exactly is the values of that company? How do they treat their employees? Did they treat them as associates, or did they treat them as an expendable asset? And they're going to make a distinction out of what company they're going to work for based upon those metrics.
Yeah, and it's I remember an HR person telling me this, and I don't agree with it. He goes, because we had a couple of turnovers and things like that, and we had to downsize, or right size is the word, right? And an HR person told me something that always stuck with me, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty relevant. She said, Ken, don't worry about it. Employees or team members are like sticks in the sand. When you remove the stick, the sand will fill the spot, and then you just find another stick to put in the sand. And I'm like, wow, and that's coming from HR, which is supposed to be defending employees.
I think that's pretty short-sighted. I mean, I realize today we're in intelligence capital mode, and as a manager, you have to realize that your assets walk out the door every night.
Right. That's
and
right.
You've got to keep them coming back, because it's not somebody on an auto line turning a screw that you could make that comment. But today, employees are intellectual capital. And
Yeah.
You've got to realize that when they go home, if they don't come back, you're in trouble.
Yeah, imagine that if you and we probably wouldn't do that. Just culturally, in our environment, we grew up with a different culture. It was like you have to stay until the boss leaves. You get in before the boss shows up. You stay until the boss leaves. You're the first man in, last man out. Or I've used the word man as everybody, right? But first person in, last person out. That was the idea. Nowadays, I don't know if that even exists, where it matters anymore, right? It's just you show up to work, you do your job, and then you go home, and then they take time off, and they do all this thing. And I just think it's an interesting environment. I like to say, because I have a millennial child, I like to say that there's a good base there, but I don't know.
Well, I think Steve Jobs probably said it very eloquently. He said, every morning when he looked in the mirror, if he didn't like what he was doing for so many days, he realized it was time to do something else.
Yeah, that's right. And I read something that is also pretty interesting. It said we work to retirement, right? To 62, 65, whatever it is. The average person lives, if they're lucky, lives to 80, right? That's like the high, between 70 and 80. Really interesting thing. And it's like thought provoking. So we work until we're 62 to enjoy our life for 8 years before we're dead. Before we're dead.
Wow.
So I don't know. And then we don't have, I don't think anybody right now, if you look up the statistics, the average person is switching jobs every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get the Rolex watch at the retirement anymore. And, you look at somebody, at least if I look at someone in the corporate world and they're with the same company for 10 years, I'm wondering, why didn't he move on? Why didn't someone else want that person? That's how I see it.
Well, I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he was telling me the story about the senior partner in a law firm. He's interviewing candidates
Yeah.
out of law school, and he says, I'm hearing questions from these young men and women that I would have been afraid to ask 30 years ago. They're asking me about how long is my vacation?
Right.
Do you do flex time? Do we
Right.
get personal days? They're asking him questions. He said, when I came out of school, I just wanted the job. I wasn't going
Right.
to ask
All these questions,
all
right?
these questions.
When do I get a promotion?
Yeah.
When's my first raise coming?
What's the path to partnership?
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, as we become more and more an intellectual work environment, human capital takes on a more and more important role.
Right.
And you have to cater to that human capital.
No, I think so. And listen, I've had a couple corporate gigs, and that's what we use. That's what we're trained on. Our team is valuable because without the team, you can't get where you need to get. There's always one person or two members of the team that may not produce as much as, let's say, the other 4 or 5, but that's expected, right? Again, I'll use the baseball. If you got 9 guys on the field, one of them is your weakest link. That's going to be expected. You can't avoid that but the idea is, I always thought if I can raise the level of my team up, everybody raises, like the C rate. If everybody raises, that means the bottom individual is raised a little bit too, just like everybody else. So we're raising the expectations, raising the team performance.
But I think technology is going to force you to do that. Take banking, for instance. There's been so many developments in the banking industry. I mean, years ago, not too long ago, you would actually go into a bank and deposit a check or
Right.
make a withdrawal
Right.
or do some type of interaction.
Right.
Today, I don't remember the last time I walked into a bank to do a transaction. I mean, I take a picture of the check from my camera to deposit it.
So the other day, this is crazy, but this just happened to me. The other day, we had a check, and my wife and I are running around, we're running our errands, and I said, we got to drop this check off at the bank. Okay, no problem. We get to the bank, the machine's down, whatever it is, right? I said, all right, I'll stop by. So I put the check. I give it back to my wife. She puts it in her purse, and we forget about it. Then we wanted to go out a few days later, run some more errands, and we ran into some, I don't know, we got delayed as always. We got delayed, and then while we're delayed, she takes a picture of the check and deposits it right from her phone.
Right.
And I'm like, that doesn't work. And of course it works, right?
Yes, it works fine. Well, when's the last time you actually physically wrote a check?
Yeah, I'm going to say 6 or 7 years ago, one of those mailers we used to get in the newspaper where it says, order your checks here, deluxe check-in or whatever it was. I ordered like 500 of them, like 20
you
booklets.
Probably have 499 left.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know when the last time I wrote a check is. It's really cool. Actually, that's not true. I wrote a check for someone who came and did some pressure washer at the house, but that's only because I wanted a receipt. So if I want a receipt, you gotta get a check. So yeah, it's interesting. And then think about what's next. So now here we are, we're getting out of COVID. I think the team environment, the employees are going to be different. And the how we get those employees, right, are very different too. We have those, remember, for us, it was monster.com, right? Remember that? Now we have Indeed. There's a couple other agencies, ZipRecruiter's another one. So there's a couple big agent, HR things or employee portals out there that are good. But then what I'm seeing too, which makes a lot of sense, there's very focused portals. So if you just want a job in nursing, you go to this nursing portal. For us as professors, there's a portal just for instructors, right?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense because now you're not in the mix of 1,500 other opportunities, and the people that are qualified are going there. Because when you put out a job request, you get resumes from just about everybody, and they don't look at the job description. It's your job to filter out the job description.
Well, that's the challenge to the HR professional now. Years ago, HR professionals would visit schools, they would visit places where talent was coming out, and they would try and bird dog, if you will,
Right.
who the people they want to recruit now. What happened is when they went to that online platform, it was just so easy for someone to click a button and send a resume,
Yeah.
even if they didn't fit the description. So the HR professional now, instead of getting 5 resumes, is getting 50 resumes.
Right.
So the challenge for them is going to be, how do I target these people? How do I get a relationship with the right people
Yeah.
that I want to be talking
That
with?
fits. And I think so. I think as the the Z generation comes up, and they're all getting out of college now, we're about to get out of college in the next couple of years, they're going to hit the job force. They are, remember, that's the first generation to grow up with the internet.
Right.
Okay. So this whole remote work, or working from, having a TikTok account or a YouTube account, or there are actually people, millionaires, that are on now on YouTube and TikTok and all that stuff. So they're going to be accustomed to it. So 5 years from now, what do you do with that big building that you have, 200 offices in? You can't fill them because people don't want to come into an
Right.
office.
Right.
They want to sit in front of the
Right.
computer.
Right.
Now, I see that point because, as I mentioned, I worked remotely most of my professional life. So it's different for me. I know I can perform remotely. I don't have to be in a physical building with someone, the manager walking around tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Good job, Ken." I don't need that because I can perform that way.
Well, I think you're going to see, I think you brought up 2 good points. One is, I think you're going to see something that the Navy learned a long time ago. I've had some students who actually were sailors on a nuclear submarine. And on a nuclear submarine, you share a bunk. While you're out working, someone
Right.
else is in your bunk. So you're going to see a switch, I think, on the corporate, side, where there's going to be flex space office,
Right.
where it's not going to be your office. It's going to be a workspace that you share with maybe 2 or 3 other people. And on the days you're not there, they're using it. On the days they're not there, you're using it. The other thing about the internet, I think students and prospective job seekers have to be very careful with that, because HR managers now, when they get a person applying for a position, they're researching them on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're seeing some crazy stuff where you're, doing something silly.
Right. You're at the beach with the beer bong, and
yeah,
right.
and maybe you've got a bad video on TikTok, and
Yeah.
you don't want, you're going to have to clean up your social profile.
Yeah, and that, so 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, we both taught at the DeVry University at the and I remember doing, they had this career day, and I remember doing a discussion about that, how you need to manage your reputation online.
Right.
And that's, nowadays, it's I think that conversation is so interesting because we sort of gone off the rails. I mean, everyone in the teenage and the Generation Z, every one of them has something out there that probably they wouldn't want their mom to see, type of thing.
Let's talk about that for a second. With you and I, our reputation was, someone calls up our dean, someone calls up our supervisor, someone makes an inquiry about our moral fiber. Today, your reputation is on the internet.
Right.
You know what I mean? They could just Google you and say, "Oh my God, look at that guy! He's jumping off a cliff." I mean, do we want someone who does that kind
of? It could be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah,
right? If you're jumping off the cliff, you had a little bit of cojones there, right?
Well, I'm just saying that your reputation now is online.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is online. There is nothing that's not online. So, when we got through this whole pandemic, forced us to understand how important it is. There's not one business that can survive if they don't have an online presence right now. And so I started we go back a few years. You met me when I started teaching. I'm going to use this word only once, traditional marketing,
Mhm.
right? And then there was a concept of digital marketing.
Right.
Okay. So now I'm teaching all the online stuff and all the digital tools. I don't use the word the traditional marketing or digital marketing. I think it's all marketing now,
Right.
because you cannot have a successful business unless you're doing marketing. And you know what? That still includes radio and TV and what we call out of home advertising, because now we want all these touch points. We always used to talk about the 360-degree touch points. How can I get my brand
Well, there's
in front
many
of you?
more. There's many more touch points
Right.
now. You know, back in the day, you only had so many touch points. But that's the same thing with businesses. Businesses now have more touch points. They don't need everybody in the office. They have Zoom. They have, high-speed lines. High-speed lines now are not expensive. You
Right.
know, if you have a sales force and they're working remotely, it's not beyond your budget to put a high-speed line in their home.
And you pretty much need it right now, because you cannot
Right.
operate on something that's, under a gigabyte transfer or something like that. You can't operate something like that. And you go back, thinking about AOL. Remember that?
Dial-up.
The dial-up, and then it took like 5.5 to 7 minutes, and we were just patiently waiting for it to come together. And every time it said you got mail, you were like all excited, you were finally connected. And now, if our internet goes down, 30 seconds later, we're in a panic, right?
Well, remember when you would send an email and you would attach a photo and it would bounce back?
Yeah, because it was
It's
too big of a
you know?
file, right? So
Now you're streaming movies. You're
yeah,
streaming.
and I love it. I think I'm so so blessed to be alive in this, because so we have one foot on pre-internet and the other foot on internet, right?
Right.
So we sort of we're the lucky ones. Our generation, the Gen X's and the baby boomers, we saw the world before the internet, and even the millennials, right? Because most of the millennials are 30 years old, so let's call it they would be 30, 31 or something like that. The internet really took form in, let's call it 94, 95. So when they were very young, they might have not seen the internet, but they've grown up with it too. So we understand what the world looks like. I mentioned to you about being remote and working like that. So I'll share a story with you. As a salesperson, I was traveling the territory, and I would drive, and we were honest. We keep track of our itinerary, write down we were at store A at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, store B at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then we turn in our route information to my sales manager, and he would check in. Of course, we all know we were at the beach by 3 o'clock. That was part of
at the bar,
right? Either at the bar or whatever you do. So we all knew that was just part of the game. So then, somewhere in the middle of my career, the toll booths starting putting timestamps on the toll receipts. In the past, they just used to give you, and so now they can see because I covered three areas, the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So you have to go into tolls, and the toll receipt would have a time on that, and you would have to turn in that receipt for your expenses.
reimbursement.
So if I said I was in my store in Connecticut and there's a toll receipt that doesn't match up with the time, then you're done.
Yeah, but now they have GPS. They can even tell where the car is.
Yeah, they track you, and they have that thing, which is interesting because so we, even though I think that's where it's a contradictory type of thing, because even though we're open and exposed, we're also, I think, micromanaged a little more, at least from a device point of view, because I can go in, I can find out what you're doing, I can check. Even if you're remote, I can tap into your computer. I can look at your emails. There are stories now coming out of individuals that were not physically. There's a system that's not, that when you're not typing, when you're dormant, when you might walk away to use the facilities, and if you walk away and use the facilities for 45 minutes, it's measuring you, whether or not you're on your computer. So we are being tracked a little more, and that whole big brother expression comes, I think comes full circle with that.
Well, I just think that technology allows you the flexibility of when you're going to work. The danger is you never stop working. It's so easy to just make calls late at
all
night
the time,
and you're always on. But again, I think the challenge for business is going to be, how do I measure the productivity of an individual based upon the new realities?
Right. Right. And if you're in, let's talk about marketing. Marketing right now is different too, because I can look at analytics on just about everything.
Right.
I could see my customers coming in, my customers going out, how much you're buying, what pages on my website you like or not. I can see my social engagement, so I could track all that. Versus when I started in the game, we would put out an ad, even in a national magazine. You put out an ad.
You didn't know who saw it.
Right. If sales went up in a particular geographic region, because back then you could advertise in the Southeast, the Northeast.
Right.
If sales went up in the geographic region after the ad hit, you're like, oh, that's got to be the marketing. It can't possibly be the salespeople out there, right? So marketing would take the credit.
Well, even myself, I go onto YouTube and I'm putting in a subject. I'm looking for a subject on YouTube, and 10 or 20 videos come up. The first thing I look at is how many people looked at it.
Right.
If no one looked at that video, I'm going to skip it.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? We're looking at that, and that also ties into the online, the reality of online, because now when we speak about the online format, omni-channel and e-commerce, we look at reviews, and I always tell when I do my classes, my online stuff, the reviews are great, and you make a decision based on reviews. Right nowadays, the restaurants, if they got 3 stars, is that something you want to mess around with, or do you need 3.5 to give it a shot?
If I'm buying something on Amazon, it's got to have 5 stars.
Right, and the interesting thing about that is that you never met any of those individuals that gave that place a rating. So you're believing them, and you believe them more than the company does. So you're like, okay, so maybe the 25 people that say this place is no good really know it's no good. I try not to look at that too much. However, I did do that. I forgot where I was traveling to, but I picked a hotel that was reasonable. And of course it had 3 stars. I said, oh, how bad could it be?
It was bad.
It was bad.
It was
So
bad.
if you're picking hotels, watch those stars. But so we'll see. I think as we start to come to the end of the session, I think we covered a really important part is, what does that new employee look like? And we're talking about
what does that new environment
what
look
the
like?
new environment looks like. I mean, we see now the service industry, the restaurants, and all the hospitality places. They're trying to get these workers and things like that. And my first job was I was actually answering phones at a place for, I don't even know what the amount was, but I was happy to get income coming in. But nowadays you could make $15 an hour online. So you don't have, if you have the whereabouts, if you have the skill set, and you don't really have to have a strong skill set. I mean, you create a couple TikToks, and before you know it, you've got 10,000 followers, and now you're making $2,000 a month doing that. So I think it's going to be interesting, because how do those restaurants, how do the service places survive? And how do they get the new employees too? Because who's going to want to go and flip burgers when they want to be the person who owns the burger joint right away?
Exactly.
And that's the issue. I think there is, when we grew up, there was an expectation that we would have to climb the ladder, or
the corporate ladder.
My first real job was in this retail store. And I was so excited. I think I was officially 16 or late 15 when in New York you could officially work and actually get a paycheck, right? The other time was off the books, as we say. It was under the table. So I was so excited to go to this place. And I get to this place. It's a new business. They had a small chain up in the New York area, and they were just building construction. So I was a newly hired employee, and I was excited. And I get to the place. I get down. They have there was 2 floors, 2 levels. They said, go downstairs and meet Harry. Harry was an older gentleman. He worked his whole career at Sears, right? Sears and Roebuck. And then he came out of retirement to work for this place because a friend owns it. So they imagine the whole place being filled with construction dust, and there's still fixtures getting put up and stuff like that. I report to Harry, say, Harry, hi, I'm Ken. I'm here to start working. He turns around, grabs a broom, sticks it in my hand, and says, okay, kid, start sweeping the floor.
Yeah, that wouldn't work today.
So it wouldn't work today.
But what's important to take a look at? People have said to me, and I don't remember the exact figure, but there's been a large amount of people who have left the corporate world. People are
Right.
saying, why did all these people quit? Why did all these people leave the corporate world? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of individual stories, but I think they just weren't fulfilled.
Yeah. That's right. Why do you don't leave? That what was it? You don't leave because of a bad boss. You leave because you're not feeling it, right? You're not feeling it,
Right.
which is maybe why if I'm looking at resumes now, it's 2 years at a place, 3 years at a place. It's just we do a lot of hopping, and it's for a bigger salary. They want to get another $5,000. And listen, I'm all for that. You need to get maximize your time on earth and get as much money as you can, right? So it's an interesting environment, I think. And I think as we come out of this COVID situation and the world is changed and we got this new normal and everyone pivoted,
Right.
what did we pivot to? That's the question.
Well, the organizations that are fluid, the organizations that are creative, they're the ones who are going to rise to the top.
Yeah, I agree. So I wish everyone good luck if you're out there looking for.
I think there's going to be tons of opportunities.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I feel that imagine what the Industrial Revolution looked like.
Exactly.
We're probably in a very similar spot.
No question about it.
Right?
No question.
Very
about
similar spot. So, well, good conversation. I really appreciate sharing some thoughts with you on this.
it.
And
Same here.
I'm glad to be back into the studio. And hopefully the next time we'll have our guests and we'll kick it back up to where we need to be.
Absolutely.
All right. So for now, we'll call it a night. And thank you for joining us. And this is Professor Ken.
And I'm Professor Paul Marino.
And you've been listening to us here at the Forward Motion Business Show. Thank you so long. And I'll see you out there.
Good night.
All right.